Hello, I'm Michael Wunsch. I'm the plant pathologist at the North Dakota State University Carrington Research Extension Center. In this presentation, I'll be discussing the relative performance of different fungicides for the management of white mold in soybeans with a focus on the fungicide PROPULSE. I would like to stress that this is an abbreviated summary of comparative fungicide efficacy. I would strongly recommend that you reference the PDF document with detailed fungicide efficacy results because that document has the results for individual field studies and will allow you to evaluate the consistency of a response to an individual fungicide across studies. In this presentation, I'll only be sharing average results across field studies. This research was conducted by calibrating fungicide droplet size relative to soybean canopy closure. Fine spray droplets give you excellent coverage to the upper canopy, or if the canopy is wide open, to the whole canopy. But fine droplets do not have the velocity to penetrate a soybean canopy that is at or near closure. White mold develops in the interior of the soybean canopy. And thus, to get good management of white mold, you need to get your fungicide into the interior of that canopy, even when the canopy is at or near closure. We have observed dramatic improvements in fungicide performance by calibrating fungicide droplet size relative to canopy closure. I would strongly recommend that you review our research results on fungicide droplet size for white mold management in soybeans. All of the research presented here is done calibrating that droplet size relative to canopy closures on the basis of our recommendations. Calibrating fungicide droplet size relative to canopy closure improves dramatically the performance of all fungicides and actually helps the fungicides with intermediate efficacy against white mold the most, i.e. every fungicide performs better with the droplet size calibrated, but the differences between the best products and those of intermediate performance narrows somewhat when you get your droplet size right. So if you decide you need to use a fungicide of intermediate efficacy against white mold, either because of cost or because you're trying to target some other disease as well, it becomes even more important to make sure you get your droplet size right. It's always important, but in those products particularly, it's particularly important. So with that, let's cover our other methods. This testing was conducted with soybeans seeded to narrow rows, 14-inch row spacing. Seeding rate was 140 or 165,000 viable seeds an acre. Spray volume was 15 gallons an acre. All the testing was conducted in studies with 6 experimental replicates, i.e. the treatments randomized 6 times. We assessed white mold at soybean maturity by assessing every plant individually in 1 or 2 rows per plot for the percent of the plant impacted by white mold, okay? And that's the entire length of the plot, 1 or 2 rows per plot. And when conditions favored white mold as we entered bloom, we applied at 100% R2 or as soon as the canopy closed, whichever occurred first. Typically that was 100% R2. If conditions did not favor white mold as we were entering bloom, we delayed that application to R3. Okay? When we made a second application, that second application was made 7 to 14 days later, depending on the study. These were irrigated studies with irrigation applied such that we would achieve some degree of white mold pressure. You can only learn which fungicides perform the best against white mold if you get white mold, and thus we had to irrigate to make sure we got white mold. I'd like to begin with results from those studies where we applied the fungicides twice during targeting white mold. Okay, and so what you'll see here is the performance of PROPULSE versus a newer product from Bayer called Delera Complete. What you can see is that the 8 fluid ounce rate of Delera Complete performed better than the low rate of PROPULSE, 6 fluid ounces. Now comparing PROPULSE versus Endura. So the low rate of PROPULSE, 6 fluid ounces, versus a low rate of Endura at 6 ounces. What you can see is that the Endura performed just a hair better. They're very, very similar, but probably just a bit better for the Endura. Now comparing PROPULSE at the low rate of 6 fluid ounces versus Viatude, a new fungicide from Corteva, applied at 16 fluid ounces. Now that's the high rate of Viatude. What you can see is that Viatude performed just a bit better than the low rate of PROPULSE. So that was all the testing that we conducted with 2 sequential fungicide applications, testing PROPULSE versus competitive standards. What about if we just make one fungicide application targeting white mold? How does PROPULSE perform? Here we have PROPULSE at the low rate of 6 fluid ounces versus the high rate of 8 fluid ounces versus Delero Complete at 8 fluid ounces. What you see is that Delero Complete performed better than the low rate of PROPULSE, just like we saw when we did 2 sequential applications. But now we have the opportunity to look at this versus 8 fluid ounces of PROPULSE. PROPULSE exhibits a rate response. As you apply more PROPULSE, you get better disease control. And what you can see is exactly that. 8 fluid ounces of PROPULSE gave you better white mold management than 6 fluid ounces. And it looks like 8 fluid ounces of PROPULSE might just be a little bit better than 8 fluid ounces of Delero Complete. What about a single application of PROPULSE at 6 versus 8 fluid ounces versus the low rate of Endura? How does that perform? Well, first off, you can see again that rate response between 6 and 8 fluid ounces of PROPULSE. And Endura at that low rate is performing just a bit better than the low rate of PROPULSE. That's exactly what we saw with 2 sequential applications. That low rate of Endura was performing just a bit better than the low rate of PROPULSE. However, the high rate of PROPULSE is performing better than the low rate of Endura. Before we close, I'd like to summarize what we have learned by ranking all the fungicides that we tested versus PROPULSE from most effective to least effective. I remind you that this list only includes those fungicides that we tested versus PROPULSE in multiple studies to allow combined analyses across studies, because this presentation only shows comparisons when we've made multiple evaluations of that comparison. Okay, so within the constraints of the limited number of fungicides that we've tested multiple times against PROPULSE, here's our efficacy list. PROPULSE at 8 fluid ounces was the most effective, with Delero Complete at 8 fluid ounces performing very close, but just a hair below it. Endura at the low rate of 5.5 or 6 ounces was next. Viatude at 16 fluid ounces was next. And PROPULSE at 6 fluid ounces was next. What these results emphasize is that there is a rate response to PROPULSE, and the 8 fluid ounce rate performs much better than the 6 fluid ounce rate. Very, very sincere thanks to my very dedicated staff, Aaron Faust, Suan Collis, Jesse Hafner, and Gabby Henson, and our student workers. These people make this work possible. I'd also like to give very sincere thanks to the pesticide registrants who funded this research to allow this comparison of fungicide efficacy. Thank you for your time and attention.